Abraham, Hagar, and Ishmael. Y'all know that story from Genesis. Well, I was raised Catholic, so I knew my catechism. I don't know anything about the Bible. That's right. My knowledge of the Bible stops at who made you? God made. That's the first line of the catechism. But anyway, he was telling the story, and I thought this idea popped in my head. What if Hagar were already pregnant when she lay with Abraham? What would be the ramifications of that? So, that was the germ of the idea, and so I wrote this book, Finding Ishmael. So I'm going to read a little bit from chapter 1 to tell you about, the main character is Liam Connors. He's an oil man from Shreveport, now lives in Natchitoches in a plantation home that he restored. He's come to Israel, to Jerusalem, at the behest of his friend Ike Palmer, who was a Jew who grew up in Natchitoches and went to LSU, and he and Liam were best buddies at LSU. And then Ike moved, after they graduated, he moved back to Natchitoches, married the daughter of a planter, and tried to live a regular life. But he had some mental problems. And after 5 years, his wife split, and no children, thank goodness. And he left for Israel, lived on a kibbutz for 25 years. And Liam, his best friend in college, has not heard a peep from Ike for 25 years. This scene takes place after Liam finds out his girlfriend has been kidnapped. Liam leafed quietly through the gossamer pages until he found the chapters in Genesis. No dice. He saw the words, but nothing was sticky. All he could think about was Mimi. He closed the small book. The only phrase that resonated was the description of Ishmael as a wild ass of a man, whose hand shall be against every man. Liam leaned forward and crammed the book into his back pocket. He was raised Catholic and had learned his catechism, but the nuns taught him nothing about the Bible. What little he knew about Ishmael had come from the mouth of Crazy Ike this morning at breakfast at the tourist hotel, so the information was unreliable per se. Liam recognized the irony in Ike Palmer referring to Ishmael as a wild ass of a man. Ike had a lot of room to talk. As long as Liam had known him, since they were teens in Louisiana, Ike had been the wildest possible ass of a man. When Liam described him to Mimi before they left the U.S., she said in her authoritative nursing voice that bipolar disorder was not something Ike would grow out of. Mimi was not thrilled about the prospect of meeting with Crazy Ike, but she was excited about tacking on the 3-day stay in Israel at the end of their trip to Italy. If Liam had only listened to Mimi about Ike, she might never have been taken. It was his own fault. Now, Ike Palmer got Liam to come to Israel by sending him a FedEx letter out of the blue. 25 years of no communication. FedEx letter comes to Liam's home. It says, Liam, you've got to come to Israel. I have found a document, an ancient document in the desert that will change the religious and political landscape of the world. You're the only person I trust to give it to. When they meet, and Liam and Ike, for the first time, gets to explain this document, there's this scene that takes place in chapter 4. This is Crazy Ike Palmer. Anyway, Liam, this jar I found had a well-preserved scroll in it when the archaeologist opened it. I was there. He had to be careful. Had to open the jar in a laboratory chamber thing so the contents wouldn't turn to dust. Liam looked up at Menachem standing watch at the folding door, staring at the breakfast crowd, not moving a muscle. Well, anyway, this archaeologist, he has a friend, a linguist who worked on the Dead Sea Scrolls with him. The Essenes wrote the ancient scrolls in Hebrew and Aramaic. The scroll in the jar I found is on parchment, and it's also in Aramaic, according to the linguist. The two of them said the parchment is the same vintage as the Dead Sea Scrolls, The writing dates back to the 1st century after Christ died. And it appears to be a portion of the book of Genesis, specifically an unabridged version of chapters 16 and 17, passages which contradict the story of the Egyptian slave girl, Hagar, and Sarah and Abraham in the book of Genesis in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Ike was talking faster and louder. He leaned in closer and tried to whisper. Hagar was already with child when she lay with Abraham. It says Sarah knew it because Hagar began showing pregnancy much too soon. It says Sarah knew Ishmael's birth came too early for him to have been Abraham's child. The Genesis version of the government panel put out says Sarah expelled Hagar into the desert because Hagar began treating her with contempt. My language says the scroll I found lays out the real story. Sarah banished Hagar into the wild because Sarah knew Hagar had made a fool of Abraham. It makes perfect sense. Ike's eyes were on fire, his muscles tense. He grabbed Liam's forearm and squeezed hard. It means Hagar's child was not of the blood of Abraham. It means Muhammad was not a descendant of Abraham. It means the entire Islamic religion is based on something this scroll says isn't true. Don't you see, Liam, if this scroll I found is correct, the Muslim world will be turned upside down. The provenance of the prophet set forth in the Quran is wrong. Ditto their claim to be the one true religion. Here's what I believe, Liam. My scroll's version of Genesis was known to the scholars who studied the Dead Sea Scrolls. That explains why the scrolls were suppressed for so long. 50 years. The Dead Sea Scrolls, as an aside, were found and not released to the public. The contents were not released for 50 years. Those scholars knew this accurate version of Genesis would bring on war immediately, a deadly insult to Islam. All hell would have broken loose. So the scholars chose to destroy it, or at least deny its existence. They didn't know there was another copy of the original in a tiny cave near Herodium. But there was, and I found it. Ike lunged forward. Every vein in his neck was distended, his weathered face now red as a beet. It proves once and for all that Muslims have no legitimate claim on Jerusalem or Israel, the land God promised Abraham and his descendants. Irrefutable proof. God gave the promised land to the Jews and to no one else.